clip for you on this story. Here we go. Fight fire with fire. President Trump calls on Republican DAs and AGs to get up off the mat. And let's take a look at our president right here talking about this very issue.
I hope that Republican district attorneys and attorney
at Guantanamo Bay to house political prisoners. And in that case, what he wanted to do is use it to move people from the southern border to send a message and put them in the same place where people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind behind the 9/11 attacks, sits behind bars and send a message. Now, the only reason Donald Trump didn't start sending people to Gitmo, and this is true, is that he was convinced it would be too expensive and the facility couldn't house the number of people he wanted to send there. Now, that was the mindset of the man when he was president of the United States, and you have seen him since double down on his intention to, again, use the justice system for political purposes, and specifically admitting that he would do so to go after his enemies. I think that's very chilling. It's the type of thing that makes Richard Nixon look like a kindergartner who'd gotten in trouble rather than a criminal, which is what we're seeing with Trump's intentions.
All right, so I'm sorry, guys. I had to speed that up a little bit there because we're up against the clock, and I want to make sure that we got that whole thing in. But it's incredibly ironic that Miles Taylor is sitting there saying, well, Trump's going to weaponize the DOJ against his political adversaries and rivals, as he's literally having the DOJ weaponized against him and his political allies by his political rival. I mean, pot, meat, kettle, holy crap. The shoe is on the other foot. President Trump made all these promises about lock her up and everything else like this, but he showed restraint. And he says it's because of the cost, the expense. I don't think he meant the physical monetary expense. I think Donald Trump knew that it was a political cost, and that if he went and did all this, he would have been called a tyrant. He would have been called, all sorts of fascist, which he gets called anyways. And I think he realized that going into the 2016 presidency. I think he knew that, and that's why he showed restraint. And now they've opened Pandora's box, and it's all going to come around. May of 2021, the FBI arrested Eric Douglas Clark, a Marine veteran from Louisville, Kentucky. The FBI spent tens of thousands of dollars in resources to track down, spy on, surveil, and arrest Eric for the crime of walking inside the U.S. Capitol on January 6th and peacefully leaving the U.S. Capitol minutes later. Eric told the Gateway Pundit he saw no evidence that that day, the entire time that he was inside the Capitol. No violence that day. During our discussion, Eric Clark dropped a bomb that left us stunned. He said Eric Clark, who had access to the original 14,000 hours of government footage from J6, told us about the clandestine system the government is using to identify Americans who innocently walked into the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, the government playing cards. Now, those are a mock of the playing cards. They're not the real things. But according to Eric, the FBI has created approximately 3,200 playing cards to identify and target the enemies of the regime. Eric Clark told Jim Hoft of the Gateway Pundit, the FBI, they have this facial recognition software. It's called baseball. So when they spit in their photos, their videos, and they set their parameters, it spits out what are called, quote unquote, baseball cards. Jim Hoft says, wow, so they have 3,200 baseball cards that they spit out? Yeah, approximately 3,200 baseball cards. I didn't count them, but going by the number of pages and number of cards on each page, I think it's fair to say approximately 3,200. So the federal government is turning around and using the same system of tracking and everything else that they used against the terrorists or the enemies. I shouldn't say terrorists. Not all of them were terrorists. A lot of them were freedom fighters or whatever you want to call them in their own country, part of the Iraqi army and military, whatever it may be. I'm not going to here to play that kind of game, but we were using that against people that meant to kill our troops. And now we're turning around using the same method to track J6ers. Very telling right there. Enrique was not even in D.C. on January 6th. Judge Tim Kelly applied a terrorism enhancement to Enrique Tarrio's sentence earlier in the day. Then Kelly forced Enrique to listen to his blustery nonsense before he was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison, more than a murderer. Think about that. Now, here's the thing with all of this stuff that's going on right now, folks. Obviously they're going to have appeals. They're going to go probably again up to the Supreme Court. Seditious conspiracy is going to be a tough one for them to prove. But here's the thing. We are in a battle for the soul of this nation. And the culmination of that battle is going to be November 2024. If we don't get Donald Trump reelected, I don't know what's going to happen. But a lot of these J6ers, their freedom, their liberty is dependent on that. We have to get him across the finish line. And it's going to be tough because the Democrat election fraud operation machine is well oiled. It's very well oiled. And I'll tell you right now, if it's Joe Biden that they put out there, it's going to be a lot easier. But if it's somebody else, if they do somehow slide in Gavin Newsom or Gretchen Whitmer or Kamala Harris, well, Kamala Harris is pretty awful. But if they slide in one of those people, we could have problems. We could have problems. Now, I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing as a kind of hedging your bets, something like an RFK. I'm very much a one issue voter in 2024, and that is dismantling the bureaucracy that is DC, dismantling it. Like Kennedy said, splintered into 1,000 pieces and send it to the wind. Indirect quote. So, I'm a one issue voter. I am Team Trump all the way, but I would be relieved to see a Trump versus RFK Jr. General election. I'd be even more relieved to see a Trump Kennedy Jr. RFK Jr. ticket, have him as the vice president. I don't know. Just some ideas that are being thrown around.
Speech very dangerous. And there's a video here on the Gateway and a transcript. And let's watch this video. And this is crazy. These people are bizarre. Well, so this is before the Government Oversight Committee on, Katie Hobbs using her office to interfere with the election by talking to big tech to censor people. So I guess he's going to say, oh, but it was false information or something. And, that means the information, what they normally say.
Are you and your organization okay with elected officials giving out false information as freedom of speech?
Are you okay with your organization, or are you and your organization okay with elected officials giving out false information as freedom of speech? And Kerwin says elected officials giving out information that's false. What are you talking about? He says false information. And then Kerwin says, I don't know what you mean, but we are okay with it. I think you might be asking me the question, if an elected official says something in a speech, maybe on a stump speech, that somebody believes may be false, does that elected official have a free speech right under the First Amendment? Yeah. And then Kerwin says, yes, the Constitution does not have an exception for mistaken statements. It does not have an exception even for lies. That is the case. It is the price that we pay for a free society that sometimes there's information that goes out that with the omniscience of knowing what exactly is true and what is false, you might say that's false. This points out a real problem with this kind of question. I think is that you are presupposing in this question that you know what is true and what is false. And you're putting yourself in a position as a government official deciding what that might be, especially in the context of something said by a politician or a representative of the people. That's extremely dangerous and is also often mistaken. Montez Lee, who appeared on video proclaiming that he was going to burn this down, ended up killing Oscar Stewart, who found himself trapped in the blaze, so he's guilty of murder. Stewart, who died of smoke inhalation, left behind 5 children. Okay, so now the children are fatherless. Mr. Lee credibly states that, this is from the Washington Examiner, credibly states that he was in the streets to protest unlawful police violence against black men. And there's no basis to disbelief this statement. Well, yeah, I guess, you were protesting by, when you went into that store, man, and you took, that piece, those things from that shelf. That was really in protest of police brutality. Mr. Lee appropriately acknowledges that he could have demonstrated in a different way that he was caught up in the fury of the mob after living as a black man watching his peers suffer at the hands of police. As anyone watching the news worldwide knows, many other people in Minneapolis were similarly caught up. There appear also to have been many people who felt angry, frustrated, and disenfranchised, and who were attempting in many cases in an unacceptably reckless and dangerous manner to give voice to those feelings. Mr. Lee appears to be squarely in this latter category. And even the great American advocates for nonviolence and social justice, Dr. Martin Luther King, stated in an interview with CBS's Mike Wallace, who's the better of the Wallaces, I suppose, that we've got to see that a riot is the language of the unheard. And yep, You kill a man, and the DOJ seeks leniency and says, hey, just be lenient. He basically was the modern day MLK, Martin Luther King. He's the modern day Luther. Luther advocated for going into stores and looting buildings if you didn't get exactly what you wanted. This is the sad state of this country, ladies and gentlemen.